It's not the house that's haunted. It's your son.
Well, the new Insidious movie isn't far away from release, and I have to admit, I'm kind of surprised this series has lasted this long. I haven't actively kept up with most of the franchise, so maybe there's a dedicated fan base that just flew over my head, but it never seemed like the franchise was that popular enough to warrant 5 installments. Like, 2 I could understand, or even 3 for the sake of making a trilogy, but 5? Saying that though, I was interested in seeing the first movie after hearing it was made by James Wan and Lee Winnell, the creators of the Saw franchise.
I want to play a game.
Some people might roll their eyes at that, but it does show that these two are talented filmmakers who had their flaws, but still had an innovative approach to horror that you didn't see from many other places. So, I gave Insidious a shot on that basis. But as much as I hate to admit it, I can kind of see why nobody seems to ever talk about this movie. It's a shame because I think the premise has potential and shows glimpses of the imagination that Wan and Winnell are capable of. The movie is about a husband and wife named Josh and Renee Lambert whose son Dalton goes into an inexplicable coma, leading to supernatural entities to start terrorizing them. They end up discovering that Dalton's spirit has become trapped in another dimension called the Further.
His physical body is here, but his spiritual body is not.
The only way to get him back is to travel into the Further, find Dalton's lost spirit, and bring him back before one of the entities possesses his body for themselves. That's a solid enough premise to work with. You could definitely get really inventive with the other world and the demons and whatnot, but it doesn't really feel like the movie takes advantage of the possibilities that it has. A lot of the plot just meanders from scene to scene without building much tension. The movie tries to add some suspense with the mystery of Dalton's coma and the ghost taking a particular interest in him, and to be fair, there are moments where it really works. I really like the scene where Josh first finds Dalton in a coma. It starts off calm with Josh trying to wake him up thinking that he slept in.
Your sleeping pads. You better get out of that bed, or your mother's gonna kill us both.
And then there's the slow realization that something is wrong.
Dalton? Dalton. 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 Dalton!
Josh's reaction is paced really well and is very realistic, which helps the audience to grow more and more concerned as we figure out what's happening alongside him. But a lot of other scenes just consist of the characters faffing around while the audience just waits for something spooky to happen, like this scene which begins with Renee playing the piano. Okay, then what? Then she goes upstairs because her baby is crying, but everything turns out to be okay. Okay, nothing interesting so far, but I'll see where this is going. Then she looks around in the attic for a while, and after a minute or so, the furnace switches on by itself, and then the scene ends. That's it. There are a number of scenes like that. Scenes that attempt to be slow-paced and mysterious, but don't contain any substantially scary elements or character development, and it just makes so many scenes feel insignificant. And unfortunately, even a lot of the scenes that manage to build some anxiety ultimately just feel hollow because it doesn't feel like they amount to anything. Here's another example where the house's security alarm goes off and Josh goes to investigate. There's some decent build-up where Josh finds the front door open, then there's a couple minutes where he slowly and cautiously looks through the house trying to figure out what has got in. Then the alarm suddenly goes off again. Then he turns the alarm off, closes the door, and then the scene ends. Oh, come on! This scene was getting me legitimately invested, but then nothing climactic happens. They never even call the police about a potential break into their house, which could have helped to make the threat feel more palpable. Imagine if there was a scene where the cops investigate the house but end up being just as confused as the family. It would help to sell the idea that they really are on their own. Anything to make the scene feel like it actually ends properly. The supernatural elements aren't anything to write home about either. They mainly just do the typical ghost cliches like appearing and then vanishing, objects moving on their own, or creepy children giggling and running down corridors. There's nothing technically wrong with it, but there's not a lot all that engaging either. The tension can also be broken by the fact that it rarely feels like the characters are in any actual danger because the ghosts just kind of come and go without doing much to attack anyone. Okay, bye then. There were a few recurring ghosts, like this kid, this guy with a mullet, or this Darth Maul looking motherfucker. And this could help to give the ghosts some depth, but none of them are given any identity beyond just being referred to as
A demon, other entities. who are malevolent and have a more insidious agenda.
Hey, they said it! I get that telling the audience too much would make them less mysterious, but even a few details of who or what they are would have gone a long way. But even with all that in mind, I would still be able to look past it, at least somewhat, if the characters were at least interesting, but they just have so little going for them. Josh and Renee have a couple of personality clashes which could really help to add a lot of drama and anticipation to where the plot is going. Early in the movie, Josh starts making excuses to stay out of the house to avoid the sadness of facing his son in a coma, which in turn makes Renee feel emotionally abandoned.
You're not here with me in this situation. You're just avoiding it.
I don't avoid stressful situations. I'm just dealing with them my own fucking way.
And throughout the movie, Renee and Josh are butting heads over whether the ghosts are real and how best to help Dalton. Renee keeps seeing the ghost, but Josh keeps thinking that she's letting the stress and desperation of the situation get to her.
He was right there, I swear! Please believe me.
It could be great to explore how these two both handle a tragic situation differently and how their different ways of handling it impact each other. They don't really make much of it though. Josh avoiding the situation never really escalates beyond Renee just saying that she's unhappy about it, and their disagreement about the presence of ghosts doesn't really matter much because Josh seems fine to just go along with investigating it anyway.
I want to leave.
Okay.
You don't believe me.
I moved houses for you. What do you mean I don't believe you?
There's a scene just before the climax where Josh finally decides things have gone too far when Renee seeks the help of a psychic named Elise and she explains the further to them. Josh dismisses it as pseudoscience, and despite Renee begging him to see it through, he kicks Elise out of the house for what he thinks is Renee's own good. But that gets resolved immediately in the very next scene as Josh realizes that Elise is telling the truth.
Okay.
To give an idea on what I'm looking for, take a look at Juan and Winnell's earlier work. The first Saw movie is a bit of a love it or hate it film, but it knew how to give the plot and character interactions depth. Throughout it, Adam and Lawrence are stuck in this predicament of trying to work together to survive, but struggling because of their differing personalities. Lawrence is calm and collected, while Adam is much more irritable and short-tempered.
Clearly, whoever paid you to take pictures of me is the one who put us here. Maybe. What do you mean maybe? Of course it is. What did he look like? You know, he's just a guy. You're telling me you don't remember a thing about the guy? I told you, I don't— Oh, for fuck's sake! I give up.
And throughout the film, as they both learn more about the other, the mystery of how they got where they are not only unravels, but it also divides them even further as they realize how little they can actually trust each other. There's always friction between the characters that plays an active role in the challenges they face. It isn't just a case of the characters going through the motions with some ineffectual drama tacked on every once in a while like what Insidious does. But even though the supernatural thriller elements of the movie aren't anything special, there's one more aspect of the horror that I haven't touched on yet. The climax set inside the further.
Into the further you go.
Now, from what I understand, this seems to be the point where the movie loses some people. To a certain extent, I can kind of understand that, and don't worry, I'll get to that. But in my honest opinion, I think this is where the movie is actually at its best. To start off, the way the characters access the further is actually a little bit interesting. Josh finds out that he could astral project as a child and has had some brushes with ghosts and demons in the past.
You were terrified of an old woman you said used to come visit you at night.
Because of this, he's able to tap into that power again to enter the further and guide his son back to the physical world. That's honestly not a bad twist, and it actually makes you view previous scenes and plot points in a new light. It was previously established that Dalton has been astral projecting in his sleep, which establishes that that's something that can happen.
The ability was handed down to him
By his father.
There are also details earlier in the film that get recontextualized, such as the characters mentioning that Josh doesn't have any pictures from his childhood.
Show me a picture when Dad was a little kid.
I wish I could, but I don't think we have any.
That's because he would always have a demon that was tormenting him lurking in any photographs that were taken of him. Or there's the fact that Elise apparently knows Josh from his childhood through vague circumstances.
You've grown since I last saw you.
Since you last saw me?
That ends up being because she helped to get rid of the demons that were terrorizing him. On top of that, the further itself actually manages to be fairly creepy and atmospheric. A lot of it has this echoey, unidentifiable droning background noise, and it has some good visuals like Josh walking with a lantern where the light contrasts with a pitch black environment. It gives the further this really unknowable and inescapable appearance, which ups the sense of dread by a good amount. Although, like I said, this section of the movie also has problems of its own that keep it from being fully great. First of all, much like the rest of the film, the progression just feels aimless. Josh just kind of wanders around for a while, barely running into any kind of dangers or challenges until the script decides it's time for him to find Dalton. And when the threats do start showing up, they're mostly just silly, growling monsters that still aren't given much identity outside of just generically Insidious. Come to think of it, that would probably have been a good title for the movie. I don't find a lot of these ghosts scary or memorable because we're not given any context for what we're shown of them or given any reason for why it's even relevant. Like here they show this ghost pretending to shoot some other ghosts, I'm guessing to reenact how they died, but why am I being shown this? What does this have to do with anything? It's like Juan, Winnell, or whoever had vaguely creepy ideas for visuals and just inserted them in without any sufficient purpose within the narrative. But regardless, Josh eventually finds Dalton and manages to bring him back to the world of the living. It seems like a happy ending at first, although I feel like these characters are a little unrealistically calm and jovial considering they've just found out that literal demons exist and that Dalton was kidnapped by one for months.
No, you can't be tired.
Yes, I can.
No, you've been asleep for far too long. And you know what? I'm never letting you go to sleep again.
But there's one last reveal that takes place before the movie ends. Elise talks with Josh about the experience and eventually realizes that while in the further he was possessed by the demon from his childhood who's now controlling him, and then the film ends. To me, this just comes off as sequel bait and it makes the ending just feel unsatisfying. Like, really, you can't let the characters just enjoy their victory for 5 minutes. You have to jump right into the next story. For the sake of comparison, look at the post-credit scenes in Marvel movies. Whenever they have a scene at the end that builds up to some other threat that's coming in a sequel, it's usually made separate from the ending of the main story. They're almost always set in a different location from the main ending after some time has passed, and they generally only imply that a new threat is on its way.
Fine. I'll do it myself.
It serves its purpose in setting up a sequel, but we can still take comfort in the fact that, at least for now, the characters are safe. They survived and now they get to rest. They've earned it. But speaking of the sequels, now that I've gone through the movie, I'm left with one question. Do I think it was worth turning this into a franchise? It's tough to say because I haven't seen the other movies, but at least theoretically, yeah, I think there's a bit of potential. Like I said, the further is interesting and creepy enough that I think it would be worth delving deeper into, and it would be nice to see the ghosts and demons get a bit more development. But while I haven't watched the sequels, I at least watched the trailers, and they all just kind of look like more the same. Just the same generic scares with ghosts and monsters that you could see in basically any supernatural horror film. I could be wrong about that. Maybe the sequels have more to them than I'm giving them credit for, but if that's the case, it doesn't show at first glance. I know I've been harsh, which to some degree I do feel bad about because it's not a bad movie. It's just bland and forgettable, and the few elements that do stand out aren't enough to make me see it as anything other than just okay. Let me just stress again that I think James Wan and Leigh Whannell are good filmmakers who, despite their faults, have an entertaining and creative approach to horror. I just don't think Insidious shows the best of what they have to offer. I liked it enough that I might watch the sequels at some point, but then again I also might not. But if you enjoyed this video and you want to see the new ones sooner than anyone else, check out my Patreon in the description below. For just a small amount of money, you'll get access to previews and full releases of my videos before they get uploaded to YouTube. You'll also get shoutouts at the end of my videos thanking you. If that interests you, check below for a link to my Patreon, and I'll talk to you later.